101 UI UX terms getting thrown in your face right now. Imagine you're in a meeting and someone says, we need to reduce friction in the onboarding flow while ensuring the information architecture aligns with users' mental models. Everyone nods. You nod too, because apparently that's what we're doing now. Even though two of the words in that sentence were a complete mystery to you, you take notes and you Google quietly under the table and you vow to never be caught like that again. This guide is for those UI UX designers stuck in meetings, stuck in places where fancy words are being thrown around and you just don't know what to say or do when someone uses one of those fancy words because you don't want to be caught like the stupid guy in the room, and yet some of these words are just, no one told you about those words in the Figma tutorials you watched, and this video is perfect for you. And there's just one thing you need to know before you get started with this video. The designers who seem to know everything don't actually know everything. The designers that throw around these words and pretend they know everything were also just as clueless as you at some point, and they learned it the same way you're going to learn it in this video, by encountering the real life meanings and situations where such words could be used. And at the end of it all, this guide leaves you with the perfect place to get started, and it covers 101 of the most common UI UX terms, the ones that come up in design reviews, team meetings, job interviews, client calls, and Slack threads. They're organized into categories that match when and why you'll encounter them. This video is divided into a couple of categories, so let's just go over what they are really quickly. The first category is the basics that they assume you'll already know, the research terms that come up in every meeting, the design process words that sound fancy but aren't actually that fancy, the visual design terms that they will throw at you, interaction design language, information architecture vocabulary, design system terms that you will need immediately, metrics and measurement words, terms for meetings about processes, advanced terms thrown at you by seniors, terms from tech people you work with, buzzwords that mean something despite sounding like they don't, and career and collaboration terms. So let's just get started. Alright, let's just start with the basics. These are the words everyone assumes you already know when you get started in UI UX design. Number one, UX or user experience. So every single interaction a person has with a product, what they see, what they click, how they feel when they start using it, whether they get confused or not, is user experience design. UX is not just a deliverable or a job title, it is the sum total of someone's experience. How does a user feel when they get started using your product? A gorgeous app with confusing checkout has bad UX, and an ugly but instantly transferable bank app has good UX design. The next term that I want to talk about, term number 2, is UI, of course. UI or user interface is the visual layer of a digital product. Every button, every input field, every icon, every color, every pixel that the user sees and touches is the user interface. And the user interface is how the product looks and how it communicates with what it does. Every single UI design that you've made has been the very visual forefront of the product, and that is the UI. UI is how the product looks and what it does. It is the exterior of a car, and UX is whether the car actually gets you where you want it to go in the first place. This is kind of the correlation between UI and UX. The third term I want to talk about today is the user. This is the complete basics of everything in UI UX design now. The user is the actual human being who is using the thing you're building. This is not your boss, this is not your client, this is not you. This is the actual end user, the human being at the end of the day who is going to interact with the software that you make somehow. And the person who has never read the documentation, has no idea what a hamburger menu is, what any of these fancy words are, and is absolutely going to try to use something or the other, going to try to do one thing or the other with your product that you've just never imagined happening. This person has never read the documentation, has no idea what a hamburger menu is, and will absolutely try to do something with your product that you never imagined anyone would ever try. Number 4, the product. This is the thing that you're designing, the app, the website, the software tool, or any digital service. In design meetings, the product means the whole thing. All the screens, all the flows, all the features. And when someone says we don't think about the product holistically, they mean stop fixating on one button and look at the whole system. Number 5, feature. A specific capability or function in a product, for example, notifications or search or dark mode or export to PDF, are individual features. Features are what a product can actually do at the end of the day. They are built because someone decided users need this thing to happen. They're often built because someone in a meeting thought they sounded impressive, but they're often extremely important as well. You need to be the one deciding which features are absolutely crucial to the functioning of the product, and when the term feature is getting thrown around like it's something impressive being done. Number 6, iteration. When you make a version of something, you test it and you learn from what is broken and then make a better version, test it, learn from what is broken, make a version, test it, learn from what is still broken and repeat it until something is good enough to be able to ship off to the end user. That repetitive process is called iteration. Iteration is the core loop in all of design, and it is the process of spending a looping amount of time getting something done and then seeing what reactions your users have. Sometimes if you don't do iteration, the opposite of iteration is just spending 6 months in design isolation and then being completely shocked when the users don't like your product. So that's kind of also why the purpose of iteration exists in the first place. When someone says let's iterate on this, they mean this isn't done yet, and that's fine because nothing stays perfect. You are going to embrace it. The designer who struggles most are the ones who want to get it right on the first try. Iteration is a common part of all UI design. Next, stakeholders. Anyone who has a say in what gets built, how it looks, and whether it shifts to the end user, whether it be executives or product managers or marketing advisors or legal team or clients. Stakeholders aren't users. Their opinions matter for different reasons than feedback. Managing stakeholders is a separate skill from designing, and it's something you might have to learn as well when you get started being a senior in the world of design. Number 8, deliverable. A deliverable is the thing that you hand over at the end of a phase or project. Wireframes, prototypes, design systems, finished Figma files, or a design element in itself is a deliverable. Deliverables are how design work is made transferable. It's just this one tiny little thing that you're kind of giving to the user at the end of the day, and they prove that work actually happened as opposed to just fancy talk or jargon. A deliverable is a solid thing for you to work with. A deliverable isn't a destination, it is the thing that you make. And here's an interesting fact you might want to know as you are in this field. A perfect wireframe that nobody acts on is worthless, and a messy sketch that launches a great conversation is absolutely invaluable. So the thing that you need to ask yourself as the person who makes deliverables in design is, what decision does this deliverable enable? And if you can't answer that, recognize why there needs to be a deliverable in the first place. Anything that you completely make and give solid to the user is a deliverable. Next, we're talking research terms. These are the terms that come up in every single meeting, and it's absolutely important that you know what they are. Number 9, user research. A user research is the systematic study of actual users. When you observe how they behave and when you ask what they need, when you test whether they can use what you've built and analyze the results to make better decisions, that is user research. User research is how you replace guessing what users want with actual evidence and summaries of what users really want in the first place. Even a 2-person user research session will teach you something that changes your design for the better, definitely. Number 10, user interview. A one-on-one conversation with a real potential user structured around open-ended questions or understanding their behavior is a user interview. You understand their behaviors, you understand their needs, you understand their frustrations, you understand their mental models as someone who is making something for the user. Good user interviews reveal why people do things and not just what they do. Of course, you can always track what button got clicked. One thing that's difficult to track is why this specific button is getting clicked in the user interface or the user experience design. And you are the detective of that question and not someone who's just taking polls. The user interview is a far more important thing than just taking surveys or polls. This is about observing the actual nature of your user. Number 11, usability testing. Giving real people specific tasks to complete with your product or a prototype of it and watching what happens is usability testing. You don't give the user hints, you don't give the user help, you don't do anything special, you just give the observation. Usability testing reveals where people were confused, stuck, or misled, and it's the most honest feedback you will ever get. This is the actual testing of the product when it actually happens. Number 12, persona. A persona is a fictional but research-backed character representing the type of user that you're going to be designing for. It's not an imagination. The name and all of the data is a common result of who your real users are going to be, and it counts for everything: the goals, the frustrations, the behaviors, the tech comfort, the context of your users. Personas help teams design for a specific type of human rather than just abstract users that could be any users in the whole wide world. A persona is only as useful as the research you do it on. So user research is extremely important when you start building personas. Number 13, JTBD, or jobs to be done. This is a framework for understanding what users actually hire a product to do for them, not what the product is. This is the thing that you're supposed to do now that you are the person making the product. These are the jobs that need to be done. This is why the users hired you. This is about what the outcome is trying to achieve. A famous example for this is people don't buy drills, they buy holes in walls. Knowing the job clarifies what actually matters for the drill to be sold. So people don't actually say, wow, I want to have a drill today. That's not a need that ever comes up until you actually need holes in walls. So when you have holes that need to be made in walls, that's when a drill and buying a drill becomes important. This is the job to be done by the drill that they're buying. So when they get your product, they're actually hiring the services that the product provides, and jobs to be done are the services you need to figure out your product is solving for the user now. Number 13 was jobs to be done, and number 14 is pain point. A pain point is a very singular, specific frustration, obstacle or problem that a user is encountering while trying to accomplish something. A pain point is actually a really good thing to know because they represent the opportunities that make a product dramatically more useful. They're found through user research, customer support logs, analytics, or just watching people use your product. Having a single pain point from a user is a really good thing because now you have the data to solve this specific pain point and become really useful as a solution to the problem. Number 15, mental model. Mental model is the internal picture a user has in their head of how something works. Whether or not it matches how it actually works, it's the model in their head of how things are supposed to be. Users will approach your product with expectations that they've built from past experiences, not just right now, and they're going to have some mental frames, some mental models inside of their heads inspired from the knowledge of the past experiences. When your product heavily violates those for some reason, then confusion happens. So when your mental model and when your user's mental model matches, when your product and when your user's mental model matches, the user has a lot of fun using the product itself feels intuitive, and you can't actually fight mental models. If a user expects a shopping cart button to sit at the top right corner, if you put that button to the left, to the bottom left, you will always suffer and you will always cost yourself conversions of the site itself, no matter how well you explain it, no matter how pretty your design looks. So when you design with mental models, for example, shopping cart icons that always need to be at the top right, now you're working with the user's pre-existing mental models. Now you're setting your product up to be successful. Number 16, affinity mapping. Affinity mapping is a technique so that you can organize a large amount of qualitative research data, for example, interview quotes, observations, survey responses, by clustering related insights together on sticky notes or physical or digital notes. So for example, you can have clusters of different kinds of topics. Themes that you have in these clusters are now design directions, and it is organized by pattern recognition and not by previously existing categories. Affinity mapping in FigJam or Miro after user research sessions is how you turn a pile of messy user experiences into actionable insight. This is usually done as a team and not just alone. Multiple people will read the same quotes and the surface patterns that one singular person would miss, and then they place it in specific categories closer in affinity to the other ideas, and this gives you clear directions to go with your product after user research is done. Number 17, heuristic evaluation. This is when an expert review of a product is against established usability principles. So for example, Jacob Nielsen's 10 heuristics were the most famous set of heuristic evaluations ever. A heuristic evaluation is done by designers and UX professionals and not by users. It is really fast, really cheap, and good for finding obvious problems before you start testing with real users. So you have some guidelines called heuristic principles. For example, Jacob Nielsen's 10 heuristic principles, and then you take a product and then you review it against those principles, and then that's called heuristic evaluation. Heuristic evaluations will catch the low-hanging fruit, the simple missing error message, the inconsistent button, the labels, the navigation that has no complete sense of what's going on, and they don't replace user testing, but they do give you a lot of saved time which was otherwise have been wasted on research sessions on simple problems that a trained eye can find out in under an hour. Next, we're talking about design process words that actually sound fancy but aren't really that fancy. Let's go. Number 18, design thinking. This is a problem-solving framework with 5 stages. Design thinking has just 5 stages, and it's a simple framework for solving problems. Empathize, which means understand your users. Define, which means frame your problem. Ideate, which means generate your solutions. Prototype, which means build a rough version. And test, which means check if your things actually work. This sounds like a formula, but it really means that you understand the problem before you jump into solutions, and you test your assumptions early and you test your assumptions often. This is the simple framework for design thinking. Number 19, ideation. When you generate a large number of ideas as fast as possible without judging them, that's ideation, just creating ideas like a brainstorming session. This is with the specific goal of quantity over quality in the early stages. When you throw everything at the wall before you decide what sticks. Ideation sessions will use techniques like mind mappings, crazy 8s, which says 8 sketches in 8 minutes, and yes and thinking, which is kind of borrowed from improv comedy, but basically ideation is getting all of your ideas that you could possibly generate, getting them out on paper and starting working with that in the beginning. Number 20, wireframes. A wireframe is a low fidelity graphic grayscale blueprint of a screen that shows the placement, hierarchy and rough context of elements. This is just a really rough diagram of where everything is supposed to go. So you can have any element anywhere, you can have your images at a certain place, and the text positioning and the main tagline and this and that and everything that you were supposed to position is positioned in a rough diagram really clearly, without any color, without any final typography or real images. Wireframes are for figuring out the structure of your web page and for showing the flow before you start investing time in the visual polish of fonts, of colors, of last minute pixel tweaking. Wireframes in gray save a lot of time because stakeholders can't argue about the wrong thing, because when stakeholders or anyone isn't in design, it's easy to see your final design and get stuck in the last moment arguing about the shade of the button, or 2 pixel button to the left or the right, and 3 pixels of spacing that shifted sideways, and really minuscule stuff. Like, people don't know where to differentiate structure from design thinking, and wireframes let you create structure only diagrams first, so that design thinking isn't the problem that we're fighting with. You keep your wireframes ugly on purpose till the structure is figured out correctly. 21, prototype. A prototype is a simulative interactive version of your design that lets you test how it feels and flows without writing any real code. Prototypes will range from sketches with arrows to high fidelity Figma click through prototypes that you can which look completely identical to the product. The point with the prototype is to make something that you can put in front of your users and you can learn from as well. This is a really big term that covers low fidelity prototypes and high fidelity prototypes, and the fidelity of your prototype should match the fidelity of your question. So for example, if you're testing the overall flow of your project, you have to think about low fidelity paper based prototypes. When you're testing micro interactions of clicks with specific animations, then it makes sense to have a hi-fi Figma animated prototype. Don't overbuild a rough version of a prototype if the rough version is enough for this current stage of fidelity and planning. Alright, now we're talking about user flow. So the user flow is a diagram that maps the complete path a user takes through a product to get something done. So for example, from your entry point to every single screen, every single decision, and finally to the dead end, the final destination. The user flow makes the full journey visible, so you can finally spot the gaps, the dead ends, and the unnecessary complexity in your product. A user flow is a diagram mapping the complete path a user takes through a product to accomplish a specific goal, from every entry point to every screen to every decision and every dead end and the final destination. User flows will make the complete journey visible, so you can spot the gaps, the dead ends, and the unnecessary complexity. And if you can't, for some features, map out the complete user flow, then the feature isn't well thought out yet. You need to find out the user flow, how the user is going to go from point A to point B, what are all of the points that exist for any feature, because user flows will force you to answer a very uncomfortable question. What happens if a user clicks on the wrong button? What happens if a user skips a certain step? What happens if they come back for a different entry point? They figure out all of the different patterns a user could possibly take, and then you can finally decide how your product is going to interact with all of those different versions of things. Number 23, a design sprint. A design sprint is a 5-day very structured process which was developed at Google Ventures originally, primarily to answer a very critical product question through rapid designing and testing. So on the Monday of a design sprint, you will understand the problem. On Tuesday, you will sketch solutions. On Wednesday, you will decide what to build. On Thursday, you will prototype it. And on Friday, you will test it with real users. This is all compressed into one intense outcome-focused session. Design sprints are genuinely very useful for high-stakes decisions where teams are stuck arguing, and they force fast decisions and not drawing out things over months and months of meetings. Design sprints will force fast decisions, and they'll force user feedback within a single week. And they're also frequently misapplied as a format. Sometimes people will misapply them and use them as a format for generating pretty work without rigorous testing as a component, which defeats the entire purpose of design sprints. But again, that's how it's going on in the market, and that's exactly what a design sprint is. Number 24, discovery. Discovery is the research phase of a project where you'll investigate the problem space before proposing solutions. You'll talk to users, analyze competition, audit existing product performances, and define design principles. Discovery is what happens before you open Figma. Teams that jump straight into solutions will spend months building the whole thing, and then they'll have to go back and look at things and find where things broke. And teams that jump straight to solutions will spend months building the wrong thing, and then they have to discover what they skipped, which is often more expensive. And that's kind of why discovery is always told as an important first step. This is the research phase. This is where you investigate what problem it is before you propose solutions. Number 25, design critique. This is a structured group review of design work where your colleagues will give you specific, constructive, evidence-based feedback. So for example, a good critique is framed around the design goal and the end user needs. Does this design help users accomplish this certain task? Does this design actually let us complete this and this and this? Design critiques are very specific and they're not personal. So no one can say, I don't like that color. They are going to talk about, however, does the user complete this task in this way and around these features? So again, it's a very, very structured thinking critique that is evidence-based, that is backed with data, and it is really specific, and you might get it at some point, but it doesn't have personal taste involved. Next, we're talking about visual design terms that people will throw at you. So the first visual design term that I want to talk about is visual hierarchy. This is the arrangement of elements so the eye can naturally move from the most important to the least important element. The bigger element is more important, the bolder element is more important, higher contrast elements are more important, top of the page elements are more important, and good visual hierarchy makes it obvious that you have to look at this thing first and the other thing second. And if you have to squint at your designs and 5 things seem equally loud, your hierarchy is broken. Next, typography. The typography is the art and technique of arranging type, which is choosing fonts, choosing font sizes, choosing font weights, choosing line height, choosing letter spacing, and choosing text alignment to make your content readable. Hierarchies of the fonts need to get clear and aesthetically aligned with the brand. Typography is not about making text pretty, it's about making text actually work. Poor typography is responsible for more bad UI than poor color choices, tiny body text, insufficient line height, all caps paragraphs, too many font sizes. These are the silent killers of any real design. Typography is the field that they all come under. Typography's mistakes will actually hurt the users far more than color mistakes ever will, which is why perfecting type, perfecting fonts, perfecting all the things related to fonts like sizes, weights, line height, letter weight, text alignment, super duper important for any typography argument in the world. Number 28, color theory. Color theory is the principles that govern how colors will relate to each other, how different colors will create harmony, how different colors will create contrast, how they communicate emotion, and how they perform in terms of accessibility. So for example, in UI design, color theory is the foundation of building brands' color palettes, so semantic color systems where red is the error color, green is the success color, and accessible text background combinations. You don't need to be an actual artist to be able to find out enough about colors to design well. You can actually be not that great at art and still make a lot of great color theory decisions, still be well educated in color theory and making great design choices. So the differences that you might want to learn after this video are the differences between hue, saturation, and lightness, how to check for contrast for accessibility, how you build a color scale. That's practically 90% of what color theory requires. requires. If you want to see all of these videos, just comment color in the comments and I'll make a total video on color theory, the difference between hue, saturation, light, contrast, color formats, color for accessibility, how to build a color scale, and 90% of every practical color UI theory thing that I can probably think of at the top of my head at this point. Number 29, contrast. Contrast is the visual difference between two elements. Dark text on a light background, large heading next to a small body, a bright call to action button on a muted background. In accessibility, contrast means the luminance between text and its background, measured as a ratio and regulated by WCAG guidelines. So basically, a contrast is the visual difference between two elements. Two elements that look quite different have a lot of contrast. Two elements that look similar don't have a lot of contrast. Contrast just means difference. Sometimes people will talk about this contrast number, and if you don't understand what that number ratio means, what it means is they'll take the text color and they'll take the background color of the text itself and measure them as a ratio, and it's regulated by WCAG's guidelines. If you don't yet know what WCAG is, go right here, watch the world's easiest WCAG crash course. It's an 8-minute animated video, super fun to watch, and it explains everything about what WCAG is in case you don't yet know what WCAG is, because that's another very important term that you will encounter in the industry a lot and you need to know about. Number 30, white space. This is the empty, unoccupied space in a design around elements, between sections, inside of components. White space is not wasted space. It gives your content room to breathe and room to relax, and it helps users understand the groupings of certain objects and communicates quality and confidence of certain objects. Crowded design feels cheap and very overwhelming, and spacious design feels premium and clear. If you feel the urge in your designs to fill up all empty space, resist the urge, because you need to ask yourself, what does this space do? Sometimes a space will separate two unrelated sections, and that's an important structural task. Sometimes it creates emphasis around a certain important headline. Then it's doing visual work. Empty space, when you use it with specific intentions, is almost always earning its keep, earning its purpose. So you, before filling out all empty spaces, need to ask yourself, did the empty space achieve something? And if it did, maybe leave it there. Maybe let there be a little bit of breathing room here. Number 31, grid. Grid is an invisible framework of rows and columns and gutters that organizes where elements are placed on a page. Grids create consistency and alignment and structure and all of the good things. Working with a grid is what makes your designs feel systematic rather than random. So when you make a grid, it structures everything in perfect alignment, perfect rows and columns, perfect visual structure, and it's imaginary, but it helps you guide your things and how they align together. When you break the grid intentionally, sometimes that's used to create contrast and emphasis, but new designers will use grids like training wheels. You will too, and then you will gradually internalize what that process of a grid looks like and stop needing them so much. Expert designers will sometimes break grids deliberately, like place an element outside an expected column or create tension or emphasis using certain grids that break apart, but you have to know the rules before you can break the rules meaningfully, which means you need to learn using the grid for designing stuff first. Number 32, accessibility. When you design for people with disabilities, visual, motor, cognitive, auditory, so that they all can use your product, that is designing for accessibility for everyone. This includes having adequate color contrast, having keyboard navigations on, having screen reader compatibility, having caption videos, having specific touch target sizes, and not relying on color alone to communicate meaning, because colorblind people won't be able to tell that meaning apart. The word accessibility is also sometimes shortened to A11Y, and the term 11 usually refers to the 11 letters between the A and the Y of accessibility. Number 33, affordance. This is the quality of an element to communicate how it should be used without labels or instructions. A raised button naturally affords clicking. A text field with a blinking cursor naturally affords typing. A slider affords dragging. Things naturally communicate a way they should be used, especially on the web, and affordance is that. When affordances are clear, users will know what to do with what thing instantly, and when they're unclear, users get stuck with your buttons and your elements and your types. When you users click on something that isn't clickable or don't click on something that is clickable, your affordances are broken. Flat design trends of 2010 destroyed natural affordances. When you had raised buttons, the flat design trend took that to a plain rectangular button, and everything started looking the same, whether it was a button or not. So the question, the affordance is this element that is clickable looking like it's clickable? Is this button looking clickable? Is this slider looking draggable? Is this cursor looking typable? Whenever you're designing something, and whenever that something naturally communicates to the user automatically that this thing needs to be done with me, I need to be dragged, I need to be typed on, I need to be whatever, right? Whatever the purpose of the thing is supposed to be, when it communicates that automatically, that's when you have good affordance. Number 34, Gestalt principles. This is a set of perception principles from psychology that describe how the human brain organizes visual information into groups. So the most important part for UI designers here is proximity, which is a Gestalt principle of how close things feel together. Similarity, which is that same looking things get similarly grouped together. Figure ground, which is distinguishing a subject, me, from my background, which is a white wall. And they explain why layouts work or why something doesn't work at a deeper cognitive level. Gestalt principles are the secret weapon for making design decisions that are intuitive without explanation. When you have form fields that are closer to their labels than to adjacent labels, users understand the connection between the two of these without a single border outside of it. That's proximity doing organizational work for free. Number 35, responsive design. When you build a design that adapts to different screen sizes, for example, the same product can work on a phone, a tablet, a different wide monitor. Responsive design is basically taking a design that was built for this screen size, making it equally usable for that screen size, having that function be effortless, and designing for all of the screens in the middle and making the transition from a thin screen to a thick screen very, very natural, very, very normal. Responsive designs will use techniques like fluid grids, flexible images, and breakpoints, which is viewport widths where the layout actually changes, to serve one singular design that works perfectly everywhere. Mobile is not a reduced version of a desktop design. Mobile does not serve the same version of a desktop actually. Mobile users have different contexts for using mobile, different tasks and different constraints with the mobile screen. Responsive design means thoughtfully adapting one user experience at this screen size to a user experience at this screen size and making that work at each screen size without squishing your design to look weird. So it needs to happen very, very naturally. Things need to rearrange naturally to fit one singular fluid layout across all interfaces that changes and adapts according to whatever screen size you're currently at. Next, interaction design language. I actually don't know the number. I think it's 36 now. Yep, 36 it is. Interaction designer, IXD, is the design of how users will interact with the product, the behavior of the button when the button is pressed, the flow between screens, the timing of animations, the feedback given when something goes wrong. Interaction design is everything between static visual design and real moving experience. This is the design, the little animation, the little thing that happens when the user interacts with the product. This is not a plain painting. This is not a real moving object. It's the little bit of design that happens when users interact with your product. Static mockups can't actually show what interaction design does. A mockup can show you what a button looks like, but it can't show you what happens when you click it, how long the animation happens, how long the transition takes, what that transition and animation look like, or what button changes colors when the system is processing. Prototype interaction design, which means making your actual interaction design prototype and work and show a version of what it looks like when the users interact with it. That is a really important part of the whole process of designing itself. So you're designing for the things that are interactive, giving the user an idea of the animations, the transitions, the tiny little visual things that happen with that. Number 37, microinteraction. A microinteraction is a small contained interaction focused on a single moment. When you like a post, the heart animation is a microinteraction. When you enter a wrong password in a form, it shakes, and that's a microinteraction. When you pull to refresh a feed and it kind of bounces, that bounce is a microinteraction. Microinteractions will add a little bit of delight, give a little bit of feedback, or make a product feel a little bit more alive rather than just static. Microinteractions aren't just decorative pretty things, they serve real feedback function. So for example, a microinteraction of a tick will confirm the action actually worked, or indicate that something is loading, or indicate that an error occurred. The best microinteractions are functional first, and then they provide delight second. Animations that don't serve a function are just noise. Microinteractions communicate meaning with the animation itself. Number 38, feedback. A feedback is a response that the system gives when the user does something. When a button changes color and the time it's clicked, it's a feedback. When a spinner appears when something loads, that's a feedback. When a success message confirms a form was submitted, that's a feedback. When an error explains what went wrong, that's a feedback. A feedback is how a digital product communicates that it heard what the user said and it tells the user what's actually happening under the hood now. Number 39, hover states. A hover is when you mouse over a button, and when you mouse over something, when you kind of point at something and it changes the way it looked simply because you moused over it, when it gives you a little bit of an animation or a color change or some kind of an animation change because you moused over something, because you went and placed your cursor over something, that reaction is a hover reaction. It doesn't actually do anything. It tells you you came and you placed your cursor at this place, something shifted, something changed. That's what a hover basically means. You hovered over this thing and now it changed its visual design a little bit. Number 40, focus states. On an interactive element, if you actually focus on something, a visual indicator appears. Usually an outline appears or a glow appears or something appears, and that shows us which element currently has the keyboard's focus. Focus states are the equivalent of a cursor for a keyboard and assertive technology users. They're required by accessibility guidelines because when you're navigating with a keyboard, that's when you will be able to tell this element is selected by a focus state. For example, when you mouse over something, it gives you a hover state that you moused over this. But when you use a keyboard for navigation, it shows you a focus state that you selected this. These are required by accessibility because keyboard navigation is also an accessibility requirement, and they are most commonly broken in the whole wide world of web design. So people will break these so often, and it makes me so mad, especially in web development, because these are the visible indicators that tell you this interactive element is currently being selected by. Number 41, an error state. This is the visual treatment of a component or screen when something goes wrong. So a red border appears on a form when something has invalid input, or an error message comes up which explains what happened, or error pages show up when a request actually fails. Error states are required to be like specific and non-blaming and actionable. You can't call the user a stupid idiot on your error state. You need to tell them what went wrong and what to do about it. Number 42, empty states. When a screen or a component state has nothing to display, that's an empty state. When a new user has an empty dashboard, that's an empty state. When a cleared inbox is out of new emails, that's an empty state. When you have a search with no results, that's an empty state. Empty states are a very important critical UX moment because they'll either give the user something meaningful to do next, or they'll leave your user feeling confused and abandoned. Your responsibility is to make sure they give an idea to the user of what to do next and how to encourage the user to use your product even more rather than leaving them abandoned in a blank void. Number 3, loading states. A lot of times users will request for a certain piece of information, some data that is going to be loaded from a different server someplace else. While that is happening, while you are making a database call, while the information that the user requested is being loaded, you are going to play a loading state for your user. A spinner, a progress bar. While your content is being loaded, the interface shows something because you can't leave the user in an empty screen. So for example, you could show a spinner, you could show a progress bar, you could show a skeleton screen, which is a gray placeholder of shapes when content will appear in the future. Loading states will communicate that the system is working, please wait, and they'll stop the user from thinking that the product has crashed. Number 44, transition or animation. When a movement or a visual change happens between two different UI states, when a menu slides in, when a page crossfades, when a card flips, when a button morphs into a spinner. Transitions happen as smooth changes between different states. So there are jumps, cognitive jumps between different states, and they communicate a spatial relationship and add a sense of life and polish to an actual interface. Animations are quick little interactions that happen inside of the screen itself. Next, information architecture vocabulary. So the first thing that I want to talk about in information architecture vocabulary is the term information architecture, or IA itself. This is the structural design of how a content is organized, labeled, and navigated in a product. IA decisions will determine what navigation categories are called, how many levels deep the navigation structure is, and how users between the product move between the different parts of a product. Bad IA or bad information architecture is why users can't find things. Good IA is how users will find find things. How information is going to be structured in a place is what information architecture decides. This structurally tells you how the content is going to be organized throughout the site, and the navigation and how it works, and the structural side of things. Number 46, navigation. A navigation is the system of menus, links, tabs, breadcrumbs, and wayfinding elements that let the user go and move through your product and understand where different elements in a product are. Navigation is the product's map, and it tells the users what exists, how to get there, and what location they are currently at. Number 47, card sorting, which is a research technique where participants will group labeled content cards into categories that make sense to them and then name those categories. The results of this sorting reveal how users mentally organize information, which is often very different from how teams assumed they would be organizing this information. This is used to inform navigation standards and IA decisions. So you sort your different things by different cards, and your users are the ones who are sorting the cards, and they're deciding what things based on what they read like could belong into different categories, and kind of try to make sense of the different things inside of your site. Card sorting is interesting because sometimes your users will actually give you results that are wildly different from the information architecture that you thought was happening in the navigation of your site. Number 48, tree testing. Tree testing is a research method, a user research method that tests the navigation labels and hierarchy of a product by giving users a task, which is to complete and find out elements on a site using only text-based tree structures of navigations. You don't have visuals, nor search, nor design. And it measures whether users can find things in your proposed information architecture without design distractions to confuse their judgment. So they'll just go from one thing to the next and try to figure out if they can find the right thing in the right category by the information architecture that you've already given them for the navigation of the site. This is called tree testing as a method of testing your product. Number 49, a breadcrumb. This is a secondary navigation element that shows the user's current location in the entire site's hierarchy. So for example, you could have home, and then inside of home you went to products. Inside of products you went to laptops. Inside of laptops you went to MacBook. MacBook is the breadcrumb where you're currently at, or laptops are the breadcrumb where you're currently at, or products is the breadcrumb where you're currently at. Breadcrumbs are the individual location that you are at inside the whole story. Breadcrumbs will tell the users where they are in a deep structured place. So they'll go one by one and they'll tell you exactly where they are, and they'll jump back to any parent with a single click. So the breadcrumb of products jumps back to its parent, which is home. The breadcrumb MacBook Pro jumps back to its parent, which is laptop, and that's kind of how breadcrumbs are made. They lead you to the previous place, to the previous place, to the previous place, to the previous parent element. They are named after the Hansel and Gretel fairy tale, where the boy and the girl left breadcrumbs, one location, one step after the other, that all eventually went back step by step to their parents' home. Actually, father and stepmother, but you get the point. Number 50, sitemap. A sitemap is a visual diagram that shows the complete structure of a website or application. Every page, how pages relate to each other hierarchically. Sitemaps are planning tools, not design tools. They plan the site, and they help teams agree on the scope and the structure of the site before individual designs of screens. Next, design system terms that you will need immediately. Number 1, design system. This is the single source of truth for a product's visual design decisions. It's a shared collection of reusable components, color and type tokens, spacing rules, interaction patterns, and guidelines. A design system means that when you update the primary button style, it updates everywhere the button appears, in both design fields and in code. So this is the single source of truth file for all of your design decisions, like reusable components, your colors, your types, your spacing values. All of those things are put in one singular source of truth file called the design system that governs everything. And when you change the primary button in the design system, it changes everywhere, because every other instance of the main component was happening from the design system. So if you change the color from a design system's main button from red to blue, every place the red button was now at in the code and in the design gets changed to blue now. Number 52, component. A component is a single reusable self-contained element which can be a single button, a single input field, a single card, a single modal, or a single navigation bar. Components are designed once, documented within their variants in the design system with their states, and then they use consistently every single place that they appear. Even in Figma, when they talk about a Figma specific component, a Figma component is a master element that many other instances, which can look visually different when in different states, are based on. Number 53, component library. A component library is the organized collection of all reusable elements in design system available for designers to use in their files and for developers to use in their code. So this is just a group of components all put together in a perfectly organized connection in a design system. A design system can have a component library inside. A component library is a group of components. A well-maintained component library is the bridge between design and development, because both sides will talk about the same component language. When you have a really nicely done component vocabulary, components are the structural unit for both design and code. So both of the people from everywhere can kind of speak the same language when they're talking about a component library. You can make a UI component, and that singular component is the one thing that they're going to turn into code, and that's just the one thing that they have in common in both those places. Number 54, design token. A design token is a named reusable design decision stored as a variable. So this can be a single color. For example, color primary is #3B82F6, a single spacing amount, for example, spacing large is 24 pixels, a single font size, which is body font size 16 pixels, or any single atomic unit. This is the single atomic unit of a design system, and they're defined once and referred everywhere. So changing one token will change every single product's instance of that token. If you have a body token of 16 pixels font size and you change it in the master design file and you change it to 24, every single place that you have a body text going will now go from 16 to 24 pixels. So this is a single value that's kind of an admin value to every other place that it's located at. Number 55, variant. A variant is a different version of the same component for a specific context. A primary button variant, a secondary button variant, and a destructive button variant. A destructive button variant and a disabled button variant are like the 4 kinds of variants of the same button. Variants have the same base structure and component but have different visual appearances to communicate different states that these are in. So for example, the same button can be a primary button variant, and that's the main action on the screen. A same button of the same design can be a secondary button variant, and it's used for secondary actions like learn more, read a little bit more about the product. Or it can be a destructive button variant which deletes stuff. It can even be a disabled button variant which is currently not clickable due to something that you haven't done in the form or something that needs to be done for this to be able to be an operational button. So this is just the same exact button in different states, and each of these states is called a singular variant state. Number 56, style guide. A style guide is a document or many documents which define the visual standard for a brand or a product. A style guide will have the colors, the fonts, the iconography, the spacing rules, the illustration style, the photography guidelines, or the tone of voice of the brand itself. A style guide will tell designers, developers, and content writers what on brand actually looks like, because it's easy to say make this whole thing on brand, but you need to have a little bit of a rule book kind of written out to communicate what on brand even means, and style guide is what tells everyone what on brand looks like, including their colors, including their fonts, including the iconography, including the spacing, illustrations, photography. Whatever rules you might have for a brand to be on brand are written in a style guide. Number 57, pattern library. This is a collection of documented UI patterns, not just individual components, but the ways components assemble to solve a recurring problem. So for example, a pattern library can document the pattern for an onboarding flow, the pattern for an empty state, or the pattern for a data table with filters and pagination. This is higher in level than a component library. It doesn't tell individual components inside of a thing, it tells you the patterns inside of a thing. So for example, the pattern of onboarding, not just the button for onboarding, not just this image for onboarding, the whole pattern of what it looks like to be onboarding. What is the pattern for an empty state? What happens in the whole process of the empty state occurring in the site instead of just one singular empty state button or empty state label. We have metrics and measurements words. These are the words that count and calculate stuff, and people talk about them and you don't understand them yet, and hopefully we solve that with this video. Number 58, conversion rate. This is the percentage of users who will complete something you wanted them to complete. So signing up, purchasing, subscribing, clicking a button. If 1,000 people visit a page and 50 sign up, conversion rate is 5%. Conversion rate is the metric that most directly connects design decisions to business outcomes. So people in business will link design to a conversion rate. The original idea started with wanting the user to do something, and when the user actually does it, when the user converts into a paying customer, when the user converts into a different tier of a member, that's conversion happening. And if you calculate the rate, that's conversion rate. And when they talk about conversion rate to designers, they're talking about how much did this design impress people or convince them that subscribing was the right thing to do. Number 59, bounce rate. This is the people who don't convert. The people who don't convert bounce. The percentage of visitors who land on a page and leave without interacting with it, just view it and just ghost you away, no clicks, no scrolls, no navigation happening to another page, is what bounce rate is. A bounce rate which is high can mean that the page content doesn't match what the user's expectation was when the user came there, and the page loads too slowly, or the design fails to communicate what it was about quickly enough. A bunch of reasons can influence bounce rates, but a bounce rate is someone who was essentially the opposite of converted, bounced away, never caught. Number 60, A/B testing. Showing two different versions of a design, a version A and a version B, to two groups of users at the same time and measuring which performs better against a specific metric. So for example, A/B testing is done about a certain opinion or a design decision, because someone thinks that this version A is better and someone thinks that version B is better. So you give two groups of people simultaneously an A/B test, and now you're able to track actual data, which tells you version A had a statistically significant 12% higher click-through rate compared to version B. And now you have actual data instead of I like this color or I like this state kind of choice. 61, NPS, Net Promoter Score. This is a single question survey which asks one singular question about one singular topic, but it solves a lot of decision data wise. So for example, you could have a question survey like, how likely are you to recommend this product to a friend or colleague on a scale of 0 to 10? And that produces a score from -100 to +100. Scores above 0 are acceptable, above 50 are excellent, and above 70 are world class. NPS measures customer loyalty and satisfaction at any given moment. I'm pretty sure we've all seen one of these on some site that we worked with. These are super common in the real world. 62, task completion rate. The percentage of users who successfully complete a specific task in a usability test, for example, finding a product or submitting a form or changing an account setting. This is the task completion rate, which is the most direct measure of usability. How easy can users use your product? And if 4 out of 5 participants cannot complete a core task, the task flow is a serious problem. And that's kind of the 80% rating that you might want to think about. A heat map. A heat map is a visual representation of where users focus. So for example, where users click, tap, or hover. When you have a hot color like red or orange in a heat map, it shows where there was high activity, and when you have cool colors like blue and green, that shows low activity. Heat maps will reveal what users actually interact with, what users actually find hot in the site, and what you assume they find it more interesting is revealed immediately. So it tells you how popular, how focused people were at certain places in the site. And this is great for design feedback in a simple way as well, because you're able to tell what users wanted to see, and design is about what people see. Terms from meetings about process. This is the list of things that you will hear about process, not know until now, and then know after this video. Number 64, Agile. This is a project management philosophy that builds software in short cycles. So you'll have sprints of 2 weeks, which deliver working increments frequently, and then adapt quickly to change rather than following any rigid long-term plan. This is short increments, adapting quickly, adapting to change, as opposed to having one huge planned out 2-month document. Agile values responding to change over following a path, and their feedback over process is valued highly in agile development. Number 65, sprint. A sprint is a fixed length development cycle which is almost 1 or 2 weeks, and an agile methodology during which a defined set of work is completed or reviewed. Sprints are kind of inside the whole agile framework of things, and they create a steady rhythm of planning, building, and reviewing. Design typically needs to work one sprint ahead of development to give developers designs before they need them. This is a fixed length of a development cycle, which is almost always 1 or 2 weeks in the agile framework, and in this time a little bit of work is completed further towards our goal, and there is a steady rhythm now because you've got sprints going one after the other. Usually design sprints are 1 or 2 steps faster than development because developers develop things after design is done. Backlog 66. This is the prioritized list of all work to be done on a product, features to build, bugs to fix, design debt to address, research to conduct. This is the product team's to-do list, and it's organized by priority. Items at the top will get worked on next, and items at the bottom of the backlog can wait months or just never actually happen. MVP, this is very, very common, and people don't know about it surprisingly, which is a little bit surprising to me as well. This is called MVP or minimum viable product, and it is the smallest version of a product that delivers enough value to real users that you can learn from their response. This is the smallest, most bare bones version of the whole thing that you were working on, and it hopefully gives enough value to the users so that you can learn from their response as well. An MVP is not a bad version of the product, it's an early version of the product, and it's deliberately limited in its use, designed to test your most important assumptions first with the least possible investment inside of the whole thing. Design debt. This is the accumulated consequence of design shortcuts taken in the past. If you've got inconsistent button styles, if you've got 5 different ways of doing the same thing, if you've got components that were never unified, if you've got UX patterns that were implemented inconsistently across the product, design debt keeps growing and increasing effort to fix. When you have a lot of design debt, it's a bad design, and when you've got less design debt, less design crimes that you had done in the eyes of the user, it's an easier time being in the interface. 69, handoff, a very, very crucial part of all of this. This is the process of giving finalized design files, design assets, and specifications to the development team so that they can build what you design. And good handoff includes organized Figma files with clear component naming, exported assets, documented design tokens, an annotated spacing and behavior, and a walkthrough conversation with developers. So this is basically everything, including the design files, the Figma files, the exported assets, design tokens, spacing, behavior, and a walkthrough to the developer of what actually happened in your design and how this is going to affect development now and how this is all going to be implemented. 70, QA or quality assurance. This is the process of reviewing a built product to verify if it matches the design specifications. So you're going to check the colors, spacing, typography, interactions, and states are implemented correctly. And in most teams, designers participate in design QAs, which is reviewing the implementation against design before features ship. This is checking for the quality of the design after the design is developed. So you went ahead and had a handoff with the developer, then the developer developed the thing, and now you're doing a QA or a quality assurance, which means you're going to check what was made against the design just to make sure what was made was actually similar enough or exactly what your design was supposed to be. Because again, at the end of the day, I know programming and it's not the simplest thing in the world. Sometimes it's just easier to let a few features and a few designs kind of roll away, and that might seem like the easy thing out for a developer, but it's not the right thing for the product. And quality assurance helps you check that out as a designer and do justice by the product. Next, advanced terms that are thrown at you by senior people that you definitely need to know about really quickly. 71, these are all smart sounding words, and again, simple but important. Systems thinking. This is the ability to see the whole product as an interconnected system rather than a collection of independent screens. You're not thinking about the whole thing as one screen, two screen, red screen, blue screen. You're thinking about it as a collection of a bunch of screens. And when you change the navigation, a systems thinker asks, how does this affect mobile navigation? How does this affect tablet navigation? How does this affect desktop navigation? Because you have hamburger menus on mobile and a plain navigation line on desktops. How does it affect users who are 50 pages deep in the hierarchy? Because navigation is exactly how they got in 50 pages deep, and it's also how they're going to get out 50 pages deep. How does this change in navigation affect that? So this is the big brained overall kind of thinking. How does this interact with search? How does this think in the whole system? And thinking in systems prevents local solutions to create global problems. If you just update the way navigation was before because you thought it wasn't pretty enough, and now you didn't think about the systems and no one thought about the systems, the user that is 50 pages deep that came in through the navigation has no way to leave, because maybe you didn't account for the edge cases, maybe there was something that got confusing to see at scale. And systems thinking is an overall way of looking at it from every single gotcha point that could have been in the whole story. 72, design principles. This is a short set of guiding statements that define what a product's design should be at a level above visual style. So for example, you'll have clarity over cleverness, be honest about uncertainty. These are morals and rules that designers kind of need to follow. Respect the user's time, and design principles will make decisions in ambiguous situations, and they'll kind of align around shared philosophy as a whole. This is just fancy talk and just what we're kind of hoping the moral direction of everything is. This isn't very materialistic. You can't show design principles in like written as a component, but you can write them out, and maybe you can think about them, and maybe you can make sure when your design principle says respect the user's time. You can have micro interactions that respect the user's time. But again, this is very high level, very, very high level. 73, design service. No, sorry, sir, service design. Wow, I can't read anymore. The design of the component service experience, not just the app or the website, but every touch point a user encounters. So for example, service design includes in-person interactions, customer support calls, physical environments, emails, packaging, back office processes. Service design maps and designs the entire ecosystem, not just digital interfaces. Again, this category that we're kind of in right now talks about the higher level things, and service design is the design of the service, not just your UI product. So if someone has a customer care call, if someone has a physical environment they go into, emails, packaging, back office processes, all of that is service design happening in real life. Service design maps and designs the entire ecosystem, not just a singular digital interface. And this is more of a brand thing as opposed to a UI design thing. 74, design strategy. This is the long-term plan for how design will support business goals. So for example, which user segment will you prioritize in this next quarter? Which problem will you solve first? How the product experience evolves over time. Design strategy connects individual design decisions to broader organizational direction. Again, strategy. Design, big words, but you need to understand the kind of general direction that they're all in, and you'll be able to make sense of it when used in a sentence. 75, content strategy. This is the planning and governance of content, what to say, how to say it, who says it, when it appears, how is it maintained. And in UI, content strategy defines microcopy, for example, button labels that say yay instead of success, thank you for logging on. So for example, if you have something that says yay, the interaction is done, you can make the whole content a little bit more casual than that. Like you can, instead of saying success, you can say wow, we completed this, and it can be a little bit of a fun experience, make the whole thing less computer, more human sounding. And content strategy kind of tells you the tone of voice and the information hierarchy between those screens. So making things more fun, making things more computer like, making things more making things more relaxed. Again, all of that is just content strategy, because you can make a button, but whether the button says success or whether the button says hooray, we completed that, that's kind of where content strategy is the guiding factor, what tone you're setting with the user now. 76, microcopy. This is a small specific text in a UI. For example, a single button label or a form placeholder or an error message or an empty state description or a confirmation dialog copy. Microcopy is invisible when done well and extremely infuriating when done poorly. Submit as a button word is forgettable. But send my application is clear, human and action oriented. Same button, very different experience, very different level of confidence from the user's side. If I say submit, I can kind of forget that. I can think maybe this submitted to the server and not to the actual people. Maybe the people didn't get it for some reason. Again, there is a lot of room for doubt if you've got bad microcopy. And when you say send my application, it's much more clearer sounding, and clearer the thing you talk about, the more trustworthy it is, the more reassuring it is, which is kind of what microcopy is all about. 77, omni-channel. This is a product or service experience that is consistent and connected across every channel a user interacts with. So for example, if your experience is extremely consistent and connected across the website, across the mobile app, across the email, across the in-store, that's omni-channel. In an omni-channel experience, starting one channel and continuing on another feels completely seamless, because context, preferences, history, all of the data are following the user and kind of arranging themselves to a place where it's easy to understand for the user, and just have one smooth, extremely straight experience. That's omni-channel. Cognitive load. A cognitive load is the mental effort required to understand and use an interface. Every decision a user has to make, every familiar word that they encounter, every step that they have to complete adds cognitive load. Everything the user has to do adds stress or cognitive load. High cognitive load will slow users down, increase errors, and cause abandonment. Reducing cognitive load is one of the core jobs of UX design. So this is kind of like the stress that the user goes through when they're dealing with your product. That's kind of a simpler way of talking about it. It's the mental effort to understand and use anything. And you don't want high cognitive load, because that means your whole thing is complicated, and that's not what you want. 79, friction. Anything that makes a task harder than it needs to be. Simple friction from physics, now in web design. Any extra step in a checkout, confusing labels, slow loading, required fields that aren't necessary, Unclear error messages are just friction. Some friction is intentional and protective. So for example, you will want to have a confirmation box before permanently deleting users' data, but most friction is accidental and needs to be eliminated. Deleting stuff, deactivating accounts, removing data is like one of the only perfect use cases to add a little bit of friction. But again, most friction that is accidental and not in these categories needs to be eliminated quickly. Delight. This is moments in a product experience that exceeded the user's expectations in a way to create positive emotional response. Any clever animation, witty error messages, surprising Easter eggs. Duolingo is very famous for doing this. Personalized welcome back messages. All of these are delight, which add a layer above functionality in the user and turn the user into a fan. Terms from tech, people you work with use. 81. Front end. This is the code that runs on a user's browser or on their device. HTML is the structure code, CSS is the style code, JavaScript is the behavior code. Front end is the layer of development where a developer takes your design and builds it into an actual interface. When a developer says this is hard to build on front end to you, that means the design requires complex browser or device implementations code wise when they try to take it into a structured web page as opposed to a design document. 82. Backend. This is the server-side code that powers what users will see. Databases, APIs, business logic, authentication systems are all backend, and this is what makes front-end be able to do real things. Storing users' data, processing payments, sending emails, generating personalized content. That's all backend. When a feature is waiting on backend work, the underlying logic to make it happen on the server side hasn't happened yet. 83. API. Application programming interface is a defined way for different software systems to talk to each other. When an app shows live weather, it calls the weather API. When you log in with Google, the app calls Google's authentication API. APIs are like servers in a restaurant. So you go to a restaurant, you order something, chef is the one that is on the back end making stuff, but an API is just the messenger or the waiter who gives you what you are requesting. And APIs are how your front end gets real data from your systems, how your front table, which the user is interacting with directly, gets the food that was requested. API is the messenger that brings the whole thing together. 84. Technical debt. This is similar to design debt but in tech, and it's the accumulated cost of engineering shortcuts. If you have code that is working now but will increasingly become difficult to handle because it has something that's off with it, if it's harder to maintain as it goes, harder to extend and harder to change as the code base grows, that's technical debt. Like financial debt, technical debt compounds with interest, and features that are built on shaky technical foundations will become expensive to change later. Version control. This is a system for tracking changes to files in code over time and enabling multiple people to work on the same code base at the same time. Git is the dominant version control system in the market right now, and designers are adopting version control thinking through Figma's branching features, which lets multiple designers work on parallel versions of the same design file. 86. Accessibility audit. This is a systematic review of a product's accessibility against WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guideline Standards. If you don't know what WCAG is, link in the description. World Series WCAG crash course, 8 minutes long, animated, tells you everything you need to know about WCAG standards, and it checks contrast ratios, keyboard navigation, screen reader compatibility, focus states, form labels, or text and all other requirements. This is just reviewing the accessibility of the product against WCAG's standard good best accessibility practices. Audits can be automated via tools like Axe or Google Lighthouse, or they can be manual with like assistive technology testing. So this is just checking the accessibility of your design and making sure it aligns with the WCAG standards of what everything is supposed to be in the market. Buzzwords that mean something despite sounding like they don't. We are at the 12th category now. 87. Human-centered design. Human-centered design is the design philosophy that starts by deeply understanding the people you're designing for, their needs, their context, their behaviors, their constraints, and then using that understanding to drive every design decision. You are serving the people now. Design that serves humans and not the business requirement or designer's aesthetic preference is good design. This is human-centric design, human-centered design that deeply understands the people you're working for. It goes really deep into the user's persona and it drives according to the user and puts that at the center of everything else. 88. Inclusive design. This is designing for the full range of human diversity, all ages, all abilities, all languages, all cultures, all devices, all contexts from the start of the design process. And this is not just an afterthought. Inclusive design will go further than ensuring accessibility. It will consider the full spectrum of human experience, including situational disabilities like bright screen, which is something that only happens when you're outside and it becomes a little bit of a disability because it's only situational. Or one hand is occupied and you're trying to use your phone, or you've got slow internet, which is only a thing that is a constraint in this specific area you're at right now. 89. Ethical design. Ethical design is the design that considers broader social and psychological impacts of product decisions, not just whether something works for the user, but whether it manipulates them, whether it harvests their data unethically. Ethical design is the reason there are lawsuits for most design things, where there are lawsuits in the first place, or where a design harms vulnerable groups. Ethical design asks, should we do this at all from an ethical point of view, not just can we do this, because a lot is possible, but ethical design actually ensures it happens in a good way for everyone in the world. 90. Dark patterns. Manipulative design techniques that trick users into doing things they didn't intend, like subscribing to something they didn't want, or sharing data they wanted private, or buying something that they were trying not to buy. For example, confirm shaming. No thanks, I don't want to save money. For example, if you have like a money saving coupon kind of app and they ask you to subscribe to a feature and you say I don't want it, they don't have buttons that say no. They'll have a button that says yes, or they'll have a button that says no thanks, I don't want to save money. It's kind of manipulative if you think about it, but that's what dark patterns are. Or a roach motel, which is easy to sign up at and impossible to cancel, and hidden costs that are revealed at checkout. Number 91. Designing for trust. This is deliberately designing interactions, visual systems, and content in ways that builds users' confidence through transparency about data cues, honest error messages, consistent and reliable behavior, clear pricing, and communication that respects the user's intelligence. Design for trust, or trust is earned through every micro interaction and it's lost through one dark pattern. That's just how it works. 92. Progressive enhancement. A web design philosophy that starts with a basic functional experience and works for every user and every device and adds enhanced features, for example, richer visuals, animations, complex interactions for browsers and devices that support them. Again, the core experience is never dependent on advanced features working correctly. Progressive enhancement basically means you'll take a basic experience that works for every user and every device and then start adding features, adding richer visuals, adding animation, adding interactions for different browsers and devices. The core experience is never really harmed because one basic experience was consistent everywhere, and then you progressively kept on adding newer, better things for specific places where they could be implemented easily. It's not dependent on advanced features working, it's dependent on its basic pipeline being really strong the whole way through every device that you take it on. Career and collaboration terms, the last category for today. 93, which is T-shaped designer. This is a designer with broad knowledge across many design disciplines, the top of the T, and deep expertise in one or two areas, which is the vertical bar of the T. A T-shaped designer can contribute with research, strategy, interaction design, visual design, but is genuinely expert in, say, design systems or motion design. So they have a little bit of an expertise in one area, a lot of expertise actually in one area, really deep, but they also know the basics of everything else with broad knowledge to help you in the whole thing. 94. Design advocate. This is a person in an organization, often a designer, but sometimes a product manager or even an engineer, who argues for the value of design. So for example, for investing in design research, for treating design as strategy rather than decoration, or for including designers early in the product decisions rather than later to polish finished requirements. This is the person arguing for the value of design, not against it. 95. Cross-functional team. This is a team composed of people from different disciplines. You could have people from design and engineering and product management and data science and marketing, all working towards the similar shared product goal. Cross-functional teams will move faster than departments, siloed teams, because design decisions don't have to travel across organizational boundaries. It has people from everywhere and they're kind of all collaborating together, and that's why it works quicker. 96. Critique versus feedback. Critique is structured, specific, and design rationale driven evaluation of work against design goals. So this is very structured, very specific, has data behind a critique or a critical thing happening. Feedback is much broader. Feedback can be good or bad. It can be reactions, impressions, preferences that may or may not be grounded in design principles or even user evidence. Both are valuable, but they require different responses. Critique must be engaged. Preference-based feedback can be weighed and sometimes dismissed as well, because it can even be personal according to the user's personal aesthetic choices. 97. Design review. This is a formal or an informal meeting where design work is presented to stakeholders, team members, leadership for review, feedback, and approval. Design reviews can be internal, inside the team, cross-functional with engineers and PMs, or executive with leadership. And they serve both alignment and decision-making functions at a higher level, just reviewing your designs. 98. Pair design. Two designers working together simultaneously on the same design challenge, one exploring ideas, the other critiquing in real time, is pair design. A collaboration produces faster, better considered work than either designer could have gotten alone, because assumptions will get challenged immediately rather than during a later review. 99. Design maturity. This is the level at which an organization understands, values, and integrates design into its product development process. Low design maturity means designers are brought in to make things pretty after decisions are made. High design maturity means designers are in the room when strategy is defined and their research directly shapes what gets built. 100. Portfolio. This is maybe the most important part of your entire journey if you're just a beginner. This is a curated collection of your design work that demonstrates your skills, your processes, your impact as a potential employee to your potential employer. And it's a strong portfolio that shows the problems that you were solving, the design processes, which includes your research, your iterations, your decisions, your final solutions, your measurable impact where it is possible. And it tells the story of how you think and not just what you made in a design. And the last word for today is 101. You, the designer. This is the person who sat down with this glossary, decided to spend almost an hour, and now is 101 terms deep into a field that rewards curiosity, empathy, and systematic thinking, and the courage to test your assumptions against reality. UI/UX design isn't hard. It requires learning visual craft, human psychology, business strategy, technical constraints, and collaborative communication simultaneously forever. Not hard at all, right? No. Now going back to that meeting, you have survived 101 terms, that meeting where someone mentions design thinking or heuristic evaluation or the MVP's IA doesn't match the user's internal model in the same sentence. Now you're not confused at it anymore. You're ready for that meeting to happen. You might even be the person who explains what those things mean to someone else. And here's a few parting pieces of real talk. When you don't know a term or when you don't know what it means, ask immediately. Can you explain what you mean by that? Is one of the most professionally respectable things you can say, because pretending to know something and then guessing wrong is far worse, far more damaging to you than you needing a simple clarification. When you do know a term, use it precisely, because jargon exists only to communicate efficiently. Affordance in one word replaces the visual quality of a design element that communicates how it meant to be interacted within in 20 words, right? So you kind of bypass the whole definition when you can simply use the word affordance. Use the shorthand when it helps. Explain the shorthand when it doesn't help. When someone throws jargon at you as a power move, recognize it. That even happens. Some people will use technical vocabulary to make simple ideas seem more sophisticated than they are, or exclude people from conversations. And the solution is just to ask them to explain it in plain language. Really simply. And if they can't, your emperor has no clothes. You were never as lost as you thought. You just needed the right vocabulary. It has been my honor to bring to you the 101 UI/UX terms that people keep throwing around in your face. Now, they won't be throwing them around in your face anymore, because now you know what they mean. I am so happy to have hosted you for this video. Thank you so much for joining. Make sure to subscribe, like this video, leave a nice comment, maybe even leave your favorite UI/UX term from this list, and I'll make sure to comment back, and I'll see you in the next one.